I'm opening this now because my family thinks I'm crazy, but you'll see, my father left her nothing." The old man's voice cracked as he slid the yellowed will across my desk. I practiced law for years: divorce, probate, small commercial disputes. Files came to my desk. I closed them, moved to the next, but last June, when this elderly man walked into my downtown office carrying a wrinkled envelope, everything I thought I knew about my career was about to collapse. "My name is Diane. I'm 62 years old. I've worked out of this third-floor office since 1995, a narrow space with a single window overlooking the parking deck and steel cabinets lining the back wall. I wear a charcoal cardigan over a dark dress most days, thin gold hoop earrings that catch the afternoon light, and a simple gold ring on my left hand, a gift from my daughter when she graduated law school. I've always been meticulous, double-checking signatures, scanning notary stamps, filing affidavits in triplicate. I thought I knew every trick in the book. I thought I was protecting people." The man sitting across from me was Mr. Whitfield. He wore a plaid shirt tucked into khakis, suspenders holding up pants that hung loose on his frame. His hands trembled as he unfolded the document. His eyes were red-rimmed, whether from crying or exhaustion, I couldn't tell. He said his father had died in 2003, left everything to his second wife. The family had contested it, hired lawyers, spent money they didn't have. They lost. For 20 years, Mr. Whitfield and his siblings believed their father had cut them out, chosen a woman he'd only known for 3 years over the children he'd raised. But then, last month, Mr. Whitfield's sister was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4. She had maybe 6 months, and she told him about the safety deposit box. She'd had the key all along. Their father had given it to her the week before he died, told her not to open it unless something felt wrong. She'd been too afraid, too confused. But now, facing her own death, she wanted to clear her conscience. Inside the box was this will, the original, dated 2005. 2 years after their father died. I held the document up to the light streaming through my office window. The notary seal looked legitimate at first glance. Embossed circle, state crest, the signature of Ellen Grady underneath in blue ink. But I'd been doing this long enough to see the flaws. The ink was too uniform, no variation in pressure. The embossing was shallow, barely raised, a good forgery, but not good enough. My hand started shaking, because I recognized the name of the attorney who'd filed the original probate case in 2003, Gregory Holt. Greg and I had worked together on several cases in the late 90s and early 2000s. He'd referred clients to me. I'd referred clients to him. We'd co-counseled on complicated estates, splitting fees and responsibilities. Greg had retired in 2018, sold his practice, moved to Florida. I'd gotten a postcard from him, that Christmas palm trees and a beach, living the dream scrawled on the back. I looked at Mr. Whitfield. I said, "Can I keep this for a few days? I need to verify some things." He nodded. He said, "I knew my father wouldn't have done that to us. I knew it." After he left, I locked the door to my office and sat at my desk for a long time, staring at that will. Then I got up, walked to the filing cabinets, and started pulling cases. Every file where Greg and I had worked together, every probate, every trust, every estate settlement from 2002 to 2006. By midnight, I had 37 files spread across my office floor, 600 pages of documents, affidavits, property deeds, financial transfers. I checked every notary seal, every signature line, every witness statement. Most were clean, most were legitimate. But 3 files had the same shallow embossing, the same too uniform ink, the same name, Ellen Grady, Notary Public. One file was a property deed transfer. Linda Marsh, age 78 at the time, selling her home to her nephew David for $30,000. The house was worth at least $200,000. I remembered Linda sitting in my office, confused, asking why she was selling. Her nephew had been there, reassuring her, saying she needed the money for medical bills, that he'd take care of her. I'd asked her twice if she understood what she was signing. She'd nodded, hand shaking, and signed. The second file was a trust amendment. Robert Keene, transferring his mother's assets into his own name 6 months before she died. He'd shown me a letter from his mother authorizing the change, her signature shaky but clear. I'd questioned the timing, but the letter seemed legitimate. The notary seal on that letter was fake. The third file destroyed me. A divorce settlement, Cheryl Lansing, giving up custody of her two daughters, ages 8 and 6 at the time, along with most of the marital assets. She'd been so quiet during mediation, barely spoke, just signed where her lawyer pointed. Her lawyer had told me she was depressed, wanted it over quickly. I'd filed the paperwork without a second thought. The notary seal on Cheryl's signature page was fake, which meant Cheryl had never legally agreed to give up her children. I sat on my office floor at 2 in the morning, surrounded by files, and realized I'd helped steal houses, money, and children. I'd been careful, thorough, meticulous, and it hadn't mattered because I'd trusted Greg. I'd trusted the documents he brought me. I'd never questioned whether a notary seal could be forged. I called my paralegal, Maya, at 7 in the morning. She'd been with me since 2008, knew my filing system better than I did. I told her I needed every case file that involved Gregory Holt, from the day I opened my practice until the day he retired. She asked if something was wrong. I said I'd explain when she got to the office. Maya arrived at 8 with 2 coffees and a worried expression. I showed her the 3 files, pointed out the forged seals. She went pale. She said, "How many cases did you work with him?" I said, "Pull them all. I need to know." By noon, we had the list. 14 cases between 1998 and 2006, estates, trusts, property transfers, 1 adoption, 2 divorce settlements. Maya started pulling files from the archives while I checked each document. 9 of the 14 cases had forged notary seals, 9 families had been defrauded, and I'd filed the paperwork that made it legal. I asked Maya if she'd ever met Ellen Grady, the notary whose name appeared on most of the seals. She shook her head. I opened my laptop and searched the state notary database. Ellen Grady had been licensed in 1985, renewed every 4 years through 2006, but her address was a P.O. box in a town 50 miles away. Her phone number was disconnected. No one named Ellen Grady currently lived at any address in the county. I called the county clerk's office. I asked if they had any complaints on file for a notary named Ellen Grady. The clerk put me on hold for 10 minutes. When she came back, her voice had changed, guarded, formal. She said Ellen Grady's license had been revoked in 2007 for notarizing documents without witnessing signatures. There had been 12 complaints filed between 2006 and 2007. I asked if any of the complaints mentioned Gregory Holt. She said she couldn't share specific details, but a lot of them involved estate cases handled by attorneys in this region. I hung up and looked at Maya. I said, Greg was paying Ellen to notarize documents she never witnessed. When people started complaining, he retired and left me holding the files. Maya sat down hard in the chair across from my desk. She said, "What are you going to do?" That was the question, wasn't it? If I reported the fraud, I'd have to admit I'd filed the documents. I could lose my license, face malpractice suits, be disbarred. My reputation, built over 30 years, would be destroyed. But if I stayed quiet, 9 families would never know they'd been cheated. Linda Marsh would never get her house back. Cheryl Lansing would never get her daughters back. Robert Keene's siblings would never get their share of their mother's estate. I told Maya I needed time to think. She nodded, gathered her things, left me alone in my office. I pulled out the 3 files I'd found first. Linda, Robert, Cheryl. I read every page, looking for something I'd missed, some explanation that didn't involve fraud. There was nothing. The documents were clean, well drafted, properly filed. Everything was perfect, except for the one thing that mattered. The notary seals were fake. I opened my desk drawer and found a business card buried under old receipts and sticky notes. Sarah Vance, investigator with the State Bar Association. I'd worked with her 5 years ago on a case where a client had been scammed by another lawyer. Sarah had recovered most of the money, gotten the lawyer disbarred. She'd told me, "If you ever see something suspicious, call me first. Don't wait." I called her number. She answered on the second ring. I said, "Sarah, it's Diane. I need to report a fraud, but I'm implicated." There was a pause. Then she said, "Come to my office tomorrow morning at 9. Bring everything." I hung up and looked at the files on my desk. Then I opened my laptop and started writing. 9 letters, one for each client whose case had been affected by the forged seals. I wrote the same message 9 times. I have discovered evidence that documents filed in your case may contain fraudulent notarizations. I am cooperating with the State Bar Association to investigate this matter. You may be entitled to reopen your case and seek remedies. I will keep you informed of all developments and offer my full assistance in resolving this situation. I printed each letter, signed them by hand, put them in envelopes with my office letterhead. I drove to the post office before it closed at 5 and mailed all 9, no return address, no way to take it back. That night I called my daughter, Nicole. She's a lawyer too, works for a legal aid clinic in another state, helps people who can't afford representation. She's always been better than me, more principled, more brave. I told her what I'd found. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for so long, I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, "Mom, you did the right thing reporting it." I said, "I'm going to lose everything. My license, my practice, my reputation." She said, "Maybe, but you'll keep the thing that matters most, your integrity." I wanted to believe her, but sitting in my empty house, looking at 30 years of case files stacked in my home office, I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff. The next morning, I met Sarah Vance at the Bar Association headquarters downtown. I brought all 14 files, the list of cases, the notary database printout, and Mr. Whitfield's forged will. I laid everything on her conference table. Sarah spent an hour reviewing the documents, taking notes in a leather-bound notebook. She photographed each forged seal, compared them side by side. Finally, she looked up at me. She said, "You're not the only one. We've had 6 complaints about Gregory Holt in the past 3 years, all from clients who reopened old cases and found irregularities. But you're the first attorney to come forward voluntarily." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, exactly, but the knowledge that I wasn't alone, that other people had been fooled too. I said, "What happens now?" Sarah explained the process. She'd open a formal investigation into Greg's practice. She'd interview the 9 clients I'd identified, plus any others who came forward. She'd try to subpoena Greg's old files if they still existed. I'd have to give a deposition, answer questions about every case I'd worked with him. The bar would review my conduct, determine whether I'd been negligent or complicit. I asked what the best case scenario looked like. She said, "You reported it voluntarily. You have a clean record. You're cooperating fully. The bar will take that into account, but I can't make promises." I asked about the worst case scenario. She didn't answer directly. She just said, "Make sure you have a good lawyer." I left her office and drove back to mine. Maya was waiting, sorting through more files. She looked up when I walked in. She said, "How did it go?" I told her. Then I said, "We're going to help fix this, starting with Linda Marsh." Linda was still alive. I found her through the county records. She was living in a nursing home on the east side of town. I called the main number, asked to speak with her. The nurse who answered said Linda didn't get many calls. I'd have to leave a message. 2 hours later, my phone rang. An elderly voice, shaky but sharp, said, "This is Linda Marsh, who's asking about my house." I explained who I was, that I'd handled the property transfer 20 years ago. I said I'd discovered evidence the notary seal was fraudulent, which meant the sale might be invalid. There was a long silence. Then Linda started crying. She said, "I knew it. I knew he stole that house. I've been telling people for 20 years, and nobody believed me." She said her nephew David had put her in the nursing home, took control of her finances, told everyone she was senile, that she didn't understand what she was saying. She said she'd tried to get a lawyer, but no one would take the case because the sale looked legitimate on paper. I said, "I believe you, and I'm going to help you get your house back." She asked if I had family who could help with the legal process. She said she had a granddaughter, Amy, who lived in California. Amy had always suspected something was wrong, but she lived 3,000 miles away and couldn't prove anything. Linda gave me Amy's number. I called Amy that afternoon. She answered on the first ring, voice tight with suspicion. I explained who I was, what I'd found. She said, "You're telling me my uncle forged documents to steal my grandmother's house?" I said, "Yes, and I'm willing to testify to that in court." Amy was silent for a moment. Then she said, "When can we file?" We filed a motion to set aside the deed 2 weeks later in circuit court. I submitted the original deed with the forged notary seal, the database record showing Ellen Grady's revoked license, and a detailed affidavit explaining how I'd discovered the fraud and what I'd found. David Marsh hired a lawyer immediately, tried to argue the deed was valid despite the questionable notarization, but the evidence was overwhelming. The hearing took 3 hours. The judge reviewed every document, asked pointed questions about the timeline, the sale price, Linda's mental state at the time of signing. David's lawyer tried to claim Linda had been competent, that she'd wanted to sell, but I testified about her confusion during the signing, how many times I'd had to ask if she understood. Amy testified about phone calls from Linda over the years, begging her to help get the house back. The judge voided the deed in October. He ordered David to vacate the property within 30 days and return any rental income he'd collected over the past 5 years. Linda got her house back. Amy flew in from California, moved Linda out of the nursing home and into a smaller assisted living facility closer to the old house. Linda called me the day Amy handed her the keys. She said, "I'm not crazy. I knew I wasn't crazy." I started crying because Linda had been right for 20 years and I'd been the person who helped take her house away. The state bar investigation took 9 months, and every day of those 9 months felt like walking through fire. Sarah Vance interviewed all 9 clients I'd identified, plus 4 more who came forward after hearing about the case through local news coverage. The story had broken in the regional paper, local attorney uncovers decade-long fraud scheme, and suddenly my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Some calls were from potential victims, others were from reporters wanting interviews. A few were from former colleagues asking if I was okay, their voices careful and distant. I stopped answering most of them. I focused on the work. Sarah subpoenaed Greg's old files from a storage unit in Florida. He'd kept everything, thousands of pages of documents going back to 1995, meticulously organized in bankers' boxes. We spent 3 weeks in a conference room at the Bar Association headquarters, going through every file, checking every seal, building a timeline of the fraud. She deposed 2 other attorneys who'd worked with Greg on estate cases. Both claimed they'd never suspected anything. Both looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and judgment, as if they were thinking, "How did you miss this?" Sarah found 17 additional cases with forged notary seals, cases I'd never been involved with. Some went back to 1998, before I'd even met Greg. Others were from 2005 and 2006, right before the complaints started rolling in. The pattern was clear. Greg would identify vulnerable clients, elderly, isolated, dealing with grief or illness, and offer to handle their estate planning. He'd draft documents that shifted assets to whoever was paying him the most, usually a family member willing to cut corners. Then he'd have Ellen Grady notarize the signatures without ever meeting the clients. Ellen had been complicit, but she'd also been desperate. Sarah tracked her down, living in a trailer park 3 counties over, working at a gas station, barely scraping by. Ellen agreed to talk in exchange for immunity. She sat across from us in that same conference room, thin and hollow-eyed, chain-smoking, even though it wasn't allowed. She said Greg had paid her $200 per document, cash under the table. She said she'd needed the money for her daughter's medical bills. She said she'd known it was wrong, but had convinced herself it wasn't really hurting anyone. I wanted to hate her, but sitting there, listening to her talk about choosing between notarizing a fake document and watching her daughter go without insulin, I just felt tired. The whole system had failed. Not just Greg, not just Ellen, but all of us who'd been too busy, too trusting, too focused on moving files across our desks to notice what was happening. One afternoon in June, Sarah and I were reviewing a particularly complicated case, a trust that had been amended 3 times in the final year of the truster's life, each amendment shifting more assets to the youngest son. The notary seals on all 3 amendments were fake. Sarah looked up at me and said, "How many cases do you think are out there that we'll never find? People who died without anyone questioning the documents, families who accepted outcomes they shouldn't have had to accept." I said, "Hundreds, probably, maybe thousands." She said, "And we can't do anything about them." I said, "No, we can't." That was the hardest part, knowing that for every Linda Marsh we helped, there were dozens of people we'd never reach. People who'd lost homes, inheritances, custody of their children, and would never know it hadn't been legitimate. People who died believing they'd been abandoned by family members who'd actually fought for them. The investigation expanded beyond just Greg's cases. The bar started looking at other attorneys in the region, checking for similar patterns. They found 3 more lawyers who'd used questionable notarizations, though none on the scale of Greg's operation. 2 of them retired immediately. One fought the charges, hired an expensive defense attorney, tried to argue that he'd relied on the notary's credentials in good faith. The bar suspended his license, pending a full hearing. I watched those cases unfold and felt a complicated mixture of vindication and guilt. Vindication because I wasn't the only one who'd been fooled. Guilt because maybe if I'd caught it sooner, if I'd been more careful, some of these other cases wouldn't have happened. In July, I got a call from a woman named Patricia Venner. Her mother had died in 2004, left everything to Patricia's brother in a will that Greg had prepared. Patricia had always suspected something was wrong. Her mother had promised to split the estate evenly, had said so multiple times. But the will was clear, properly executed, notarized. Patricia had contested it, lost, walked away. Now she was calling because she'd seen my name in the paper. I pulled the file. The notary seal was fake. Same shallow embossing, same 2 uniform ink. I called Patricia back and told her. She started crying. She said, "I knew it. I knew my mother wouldn't have done that." I helped her file a motion to reopen the probate case. Her brother fought it, claimed the delay meant she'd waived her rights, but the judge ruled that fraud voids all deadlines. The case was reopened. Patricia and her brother eventually settled. He kept the house, she got half the financial assets. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Patricia sent me a thank you card afterward. Inside she'd written, "You gave me back my mother's love. That's worth more than any money." I put that card on my desk next to Linda's key. The depositions were brutal. I sat in a windowless conference room for 6 hours while a bar association attorney asked me questions about every case I'd ever worked with Greg. Did I verify this signature? Did I check that seal? Why didn't I question this timeline? What about this inconsistency? I answered every question honestly. Yes, I should have checked more carefully. No, I didn't verify the notary's credentials. Yes, I trusted Greg because we'd worked together before. No, I never suspected he was defrauding clients. The attorney, a man named Richard Chen, precise and relentless, asked me if I thought my failure to catch the fraud constituted malpractice. I said yes. He asked if I thought I deserved to lose my license. I said that wasn't for me to decide, but I understood it was a possibility, and I accepted the consequences of my actions. Richard looked at me for a long moment, then he said, "Why did you report this? You could have buried it, kept the files locked away. No one would have known." I said, "Because 9 families deserved the truth, because I became a lawyer to protect people, not to help steal from them, because living with that secret would have destroyed me more surely than losing my license ever could." He made a note. The deposition ended. I drove home and sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes, too exhausted to move. Maya kept the office running during all of this. She fielded phone calls, managed the remaining cases, dealt with clients who were nervous about my situation. Some clients left, took their business elsewhere. I didn't blame them, but most stayed. Maya told me, they said things like, "If Diane's willing to blow up her own career to fix a mistake, she's the kind of lawyer I want." One client, an elderly man named Frank, who I'd helped with his estate planning 2 years earlier, came to the office specifically to tell me he was staying. He said, "My wife died last year. You helped me navigate the probate, kept me from making stupid decisions in my grief. You were honest and kind. That's what matters, not whether you caught somebody else's con." I cried in front of him, something I'd never done with a client before. He patted my hand and said, "You're human, Diane. Humans make mistakes. What separates the good ones from the bad ones is what you do after." Those words stayed with me through everything that followed, through the depositions and the bar hearings and the sleepless nights when I wondered if I'd ever practice law again, through the moments when I questioned whether reporting the fraud had been worth it, whether I should have just kept quiet and protected myself. In August, I got a call from Cheryl Lansing's older daughter, Emma. She said she'd read the documents I'd sent her mother. She said she'd always wondered why her mom had given them up so easily, had always felt like something didn't add up. She said she and her sister had talked, were willing to meet with Cheryl if she wanted. I called Cheryl immediately. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting. I told her. She started crying so hard she couldn't speak. When she finally caught her breath, she said, "Can you come with me when I see them? I don't think I can do it alone." I flew out to meet her. A week later, Cheryl lived in a small town in the Pacific Northwest, a pretty place with mountains in the distance and rain that felt like a constant soft pressure. She picked me up at the airport, a slim woman with gray-streaked hair and nervous hands. We drove to a coffee shop where her daughters were waiting. Emma and her younger sister Claire looked like their mother, same nose, same eyes. They were polite, but guarded. Cheryl tried to explain what had happened, but she kept choking on the words. Finally, I pulled out the documents, laid them on the table, explained about the forged notary seal, about Greg's fraud scheme, about how Cheryl had been a victim, not someone who'd willingly abandoned them. Emma read through everything carefully. Claire watched her sister, wouldn't look at the papers. When Emma finished, she looked at Cheryl and said, "Did you know that it was fraud?" Cheryl shook her head. She said, "I thought I'd signed away my rights. I thought I'd made a choice and had to live with it. I thought you both hated me for it." Claire finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said, "We did hate you. For 15 years, we hated you." Cheryl nodded, tears streaming down her face. She said, "I know, and I'm so sorry." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. She said, "It wasn't your fault. We should have known that. We should have asked more questions." They talked for 2 hours. I sat quietly at the end of the table, drinking coffee I didn't want, watching a family try to rebuild something that had been broken for 15 years. It wasn't perfect. Claire left before Emma did, still angry, still hurt. But Emma hugged her mother before she went, said they could try to have dinner next week. On the drive back to the airport, Cheryl said, "Thank you. Even if Claire never forgives me, thank you for giving me a chance." I said, "You deserved the truth. Everyone deserves the truth." The months that followed were a slow process of rebuilding. Emma and Cheryl started meeting for dinner once a month. Claire joined them eventually, though it took her almost a year. Cheryl called me every few months to update me, her voice getting lighter each time. Last Christmas, she said Emma had invited her to spend the holidays with her family, the first time they'd celebrated together in 16 years. She said Claire had started calling her mom again, instead of Cheryl. I keep those updates in a folder on my desk. Reminders that sometimes broken things can be fixed, that truth matters even when it comes too late. The bar investigation concluded in May with that 30-page report. I was cleared of intentional misconduct, given a private reprimand, required to complete continuing education. I accepted it all without argument. More importantly, I set up the Victims' Restitution Fund and committed to helping anyone affected by Greg's fraud. We ended up working with 14 families, total. Some cases resolved quickly. Linda got her house back. Patricia Venner settled with her brother. Mr. Whitfield's family split their father's estate according to the real will. Other cases took years. Robert Keene's siblings are still fighting to recover money he hid. 2 families couldn't be located, despite our best efforts. 3 estates had been closed so long ago that reopening them was legally impossible. But we tried. For every single one, we tried. Maya and I restructured the practice, focusing on estate fraud prevention and elder law. We became known as the office that would take complicated cases other lawyers avoided. People came to us with suspicious documents, strange wills, property transfers that didn't make sense. We'd spend hours verifying notary seals, checking signatures, building timelines. Sometimes we found fraud. Sometimes the documents were legitimate, and the clients just needed to accept difficult truths. Either way, we gave them answers. The work changed me, made me more skeptical, more careful, more willing to ask uncomfortable questions, made me understand that documents and seals and signatures matter, but so does paying attention to the people behind them, to outcomes that don't make sense, to situations that feel wrong even when they look right on paper. I'm still finding cases. Last year, I discovered 2 more forged seals in old files, different notaries, different schemes, unrelated to Greg. I reported them both, helped open new investigations. Maya jokes that I'll never retire, that I'll be checking notary seals from my deathbed. She's probably right. Because somewhere out there, right now, someone is signing away something they don't want to lose. An elderly woman signing a property deed she doesn't understand. A grieving father signing a will amendment he hasn't read carefully. A depressed mother signing away custody of children she loves. And maybe, if I'm careful enough, persistent enough, willing to ask enough uncomfortable questions, I can stop it before it's too late. Last month, Amy sent me a photo of the Linda Marsh house. She'd finished the renovations, turned it into affordable housing for elderly people who need a safe place to live. The little bungalow looked beautiful, white siding freshly painted, blue shutters restored, a new sign by the front door with Linda's name in elegant script. Amy had written on the back, "Thank you for believing my grandmother. Thank you for showing me that doing the right thing matters, even when it's hard." I keep that photo on my desk, next to Linda's brass key, next to Patricia's thank you card, next to the folder of updates from Cheryl. They're reminders of why I keep doing this work, why I show up every morning and check seals and ask questions and refuse to look away from uncomfortable truths. Maya still thinks I'm obsessive. My daughter still worries I work too hard. They're both probably right, but I can't let go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Because I know what it cost those families when I wasn't paying attention. I know what Linda went through, being called crazy for 20 years because no one believed her. I know what Cheryl lost, 15 years with her daughters. I know about all the families I'll never find, all the fraud I'll never uncover, all the people who'll die without ever knowing they were cheated. And I know that the only thing I can do, the only thing any of us can do, is keep showing up, keep paying attention, keep believing people when they say something's wrong, even when all the documents look perfect. So that's what I do. Every morning, I come to this office on the 3rd floor, overlooking the parking deck. I put on my charcoal cardigan, my gold hoop earrings, my simple gold ring. I check my case files, review new documents, verify notary seals. I meet with clients who need help, listen to their stories, believe them when they say something feels wrong. Some days are good. Some days I help someone get justice, fix something that was broken, restore something that was stolen. Those days, I look at Linda's brass key and think maybe I'm finally doing it right. Other days are hard. Days when I can't find the evidence, when the fraud is too old to prosecute, when families have scattered too far to reunite. Those days, I look at my list of unresolved cases and think I'll never do enough, never make up for the years I spent trusting the wrong people and missing the warning signs. But I keep showing up anyway, because that's what Frank told me. What separates the good ones from the bad ones is what you do after. And what I'm doing after is fighting, checking every seal, questioning every document that doesn't make sense, refusing to file paperwork that feels wrong, even when it looks right. It's not perfect. It's not enough. It will never be enough to make up for all the families I didn't help, all the fraud I didn't catch, all the years I spent being careful about the wrong things. But it's something. And on my best days, when the light comes through my office window and catches Linda's brass key on my desk, I think maybe something is enough. Maybe showing up and paying attention and refusing to look away is all any of us can really do. Maybe that has to be enough, because it's all I have to give. Ned, but she kept choking on the words. Finally, I pulled out the documents, laid them on the table, explained about the forged notary seal, about Greg's fraud scheme, about how Cheryl had been a victim, not someone who'd willingly abandoned them. Emma read through everything carefully. Claire watched her sister, wouldn't look at the papers. When Emma finished, she looked at Cheryl and said, "Did you know that it was fraud?" Cheryl shook her head. She said, "I thought I'd signed away my rights. I thought I'd made a choice and had to live with it. I thought you both hated me for it." Claire finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. She said, "We did hate you. For 15 years we hated you." Cheryl nodded, tears streaming down her face. She said, "I know, and I'm so sorry." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. She said, "It wasn't your fault. We should have known that. We should have asked more questions." They talked for 2 hours. I sat quietly at the end of the table, drinking coffee I didn't want, watching a family try to rebuild something that had been broken for 15 years. It wasn't perfect. Claire left before Emma did, still angry, still hurt. But Emma hugged her mother before she went. said they could try to have dinner next week. On the drive back to the airport, Cheryl said, "Thank you. Even if Claire never forgives me, thank you for giving me a chance." I said, "You deserved the truth. Everyone deserves the truth." Greg Holt died in March. I found out from Sarah Vance, who called me at home one evening. She said, "I thought you should know. Gregory Holt passed away yesterday. Heart attack, alone in his condo." I asked if he'd left any statement, any admission of guilt, any apology. She said no. His estate was nearly empty. He'd burned through most of his money, spent it on a lifestyle he couldn't sustain. There was nothing to recover, no restitution to collect, just a dead man and a trail of broken families. Greg Holt died in March. Heart attack, alone in his condo in Sarasota, clutching his chest, too far from the phone to call for help. The paramedics said he'd been dead for 2 days before a neighbor reported the smell. The investigation concluded in May. The bar issued a 30-page report detailing Greg's fraud scheme. He'd been paying Ellen Grady, who was real, but functioned as a rubber stamp, to notarize documents she never witnessed. He'd targeted vulnerable clients, elderly people, complicated estates, contentious divorces where emotions ran high and people didn't ask questions. He'd made at least $400,000 in fees from fraudulent cases over 8 years. The bar cleared me of intentional misconduct. They found no evidence I'd known about the fraud or benefited from it, but they issued a private reprimand for failing to verify notary credentials adequately, for not questioning irregularities in documents filed by co-counsel. I accepted the reprimand. I also set up a restitution fund, contributed $50,000 from my own savings, and offered free legal services to any client affected by the fraud. 9 clients total. Linda's case was resolved. Robert Keene's siblings sued him, and I testified about the forged trust amendment. The judge ruled in their favor, ordered Robert to return $200,000 plus interest. Robert declared bankruptcy, tried to hide assets in offshore accounts. His siblings hired a forensic accountant who found everything. That case is still winding through the courts. But Cheryl Lansing's case broke my heart. I found her through her ex-husband's lawyer. She was living in another state, remarried, working as a middle school teacher. I called her on a Tuesday evening, introduced myself, explained what I'd found. She didn't believe me at first. She said, "I signed those papers. I gave up my girls." I said, "You signed them, but the notary seal was fake, which means the custody agreement was never legally binding. You could reopen the case, challenge the settlement." She was quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. Then she said, "My daughters are 26 and 24 now. They haven't spoken to me in 15 years. They think I abandoned them." I said, "You could show them the evidence. Explain what happened." She said, "Would it matter? They've believed one story for 15 years. Why would they believe a different one now?" I didn't have an answer for that. I sent her the evidence anyway, copies of the forged settlement, the notary records, my affidavit. She called me back 2 weeks later. She said she'd reached out to her older daughter, sent her the documents with a letter explaining everything. Her daughter hadn't responded. I told Cheryl I was sorry. She said, "It's not your fault, but thank you for telling me the truth. At least now I know I didn't just give them away." I still have Cheryl's file on my desk. I look at it sometimes and wonder if her daughters will ever read those documents, ever understand that their mother didn't choose to leave them. Linda Marsh lived in her house for 6 months before she passed away last December. Pneumonia, quick and relatively painless, according to Amy. Amy called to tell me, voice thick with tears. She said Linda had been happy those last months, felt safe, kept saying she finally had justice. She said Linda had left me something in her will. Amy mailed me a small box 2 weeks later. Inside was a handwritten note on floral stationery. "Thank you for believing me when no one else would, Linda." And underneath, wrapped in tissue paper, a brass key, the key to her front door. I keep that key on my desk now, next to the case files. It's small, worn smooth from decades of use. When I have a bad day, when I doubt whether reporting the fraud was worth it, I pick up that key and remember why I became a lawyer in the first place: to protect people, to find the truth, to fix things when they break. I still practice law. My caseload is smaller now. I'm more selective about clients, more careful about documents. I check every notary seal twice, Call the notary directly to verify they witnessed the signature. I've become known as overly cautious, maybe a little paranoid. I don't care. Maya still works with me. We've taken on more pro bono cases, elderly clients who can't afford representation, people fighting guardianship abuse or estate fraud. I've rebuilt my reputation slowly, one case at a time. Some clients left after hearing about the bar investigation. Others stayed, said they respected that I'd reported the fraud even though it hurt me. I've gotten referrals from Sarah Vance at the Bar Association, from other attorneys who know what I went through. But I think about Gregory Holt sometimes. I wonder if he knew what he was doing. If he understood he was destroying families. I wonder if he felt any guilt before he died, clutching his chest on tea.